Once again, if you haven't bought my latest book, The Real Crash, America's Coming Bankruptcy, How to Save Yourself and Your Country, check out audiblepodcast.com. You can get a copy for free, an Audible copy, that is, audiobook, if you haven't purchased from them before. They've got over 100,000 or so audio titles to choose from, so check them out, audiblepodcast.com/Schiff. That's audiblepodcast.com/Schiff, and get a free Audible copy of my latest book. We have located Doug Casey. Doug, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Peter. It's nice to be here.
You know, one of the highlights of Freedom Fest was when the security guards from Bally's came to you on our panel and asked you to put out your cigar, which you graciously did because it was private property, and the owners of the property asked you to put it out.
Well, actually, the way it worked is there was some smoke Nazi in the audience who decided that nobody should be smoking, even though Frank Sinatra used to do so during his shows, and he went out and brought up a security guard, and the poor security guard was very sheepish and embarrassed to be forced to do such a stupid thing in Las Vegas to somebody that was on stage, but it was fine.
Yeah, but I don't know. I thought it was an entertaining moment, and I asked you if you had enough cigars for everybody, and unfortunately you did not. It would have been interesting if all four of us were smoking those cigars. But anyway, I'm glad that we finally tracked you down. Unfortunately we got you right into a commercial break, so you're going to have to hold on, and we'll talk a little bit more about the world according to Doug Casey when we get back from this break. So don't go away. We will return.
Boy, you got to be tough.
This is Peter Schiff at SchiffRadio.com. On the line with us is Doug Casey, founder and chairman of Casey Research. He's also a best-selling author, having written several books, including Crisis Investing, Strategic Investing, and The International Man. He's a popular speaker at many of the hard money conferences. You'll also see him on television from time to time. And, you know, Doug, earlier in the show, I got a call from somebody who was trying to take me to task for going back at 10 years and saying, you know, you've been making these predictions for 10 years or so. How much more time do we have before you might rethink your point of view? And, you know, I wanted to kind of ask you the same question. I mean, I thought I did a pretty good job in responding to it, but, you know, you've been out there even longer than I have with some of these predictions. Crisis Investing came out in 1979. And of course, you know, the economy hasn't imploded completely yet. So have you rethought any of your forecasts, or are you more convinced than ever that you're right?
No, absolutely more convinced than ever. And the descent of the U.S. Decisively started as far back as 1971 with the 1970 with the Bank Secrecy Act, and 1971 with the devaluation of the dollar. And I'm afraid that the descent has been accelerating. The average American's income, as you're well aware, Peter, hasn't gone up in real terms for about 40 years.
Yeah, and I think that, yeah, people that try to say, hey, you gloom and doomers, you know, everything is okay. It's not okay. It's everything but okay. And the amazing thing is we've been able to keep it together as long as we have, but we've done it on the back of women entering the workforce and borrowing trillions of dollars from China or Japan or the rest of the world. We have basically run up an enormous debt to try to maintain a falling standard of living, which eventually it's going to collapse. I don't think it makes you wrong at all. I think it makes you very early, but also very astute in your observations. And unfortunately, your warnings have gone unheeded for all these decades.
Yeah, that's right. I'm very bullish on the long-term prospects of gold, as are you. And gold has been going up on a long-term basis since 1971 when it was $35 an ounce. Now it's closer to $1,600 per ounce. And in the meanwhile, the gold stocks have cyclically, they're extremely volatile, going up and down, but they've cyclically been absolutely fantastic speculations.
Yeah. Meanwhile, the naysayers on gold, or the people that want to say that we're just a bunch of gold bugs, they forget about where gold was in 1971, and all they do is point at where it was in 1980 and try to claim it's a lousy investment by basing the comparison to its 1980 peak.
Well, the whole statist collectivist movement is intellectually dishonest. So you expect things like that. Gold represents personal and financial freedom. Holding Federal Reserve notes is going to prove eventually about as wise as holding Zimbabwe dollars, because that's what's eventually going to happen to it.
I mean, how do you explain and the fact that so many people that are relatively intelligent people can't figure this out, that somehow amidst all this uncertainty around the world, amidst all the skepticism about the euro, so many people are embracing the dollar, and even more crazy, dollars 30 years into the future by buying 30-year treasuries?
Yeah, it seems to me that long-term U.S. Treasury bonds are the best short sale in the world. In fact, in today's world right now, there's nothing that's a real giveaway bargain. Even gold, of course, since its last cyclical low in 2002, it has gone up about 6 times in price. So where are the bargains today? The best bargain in the world, for a speculator anyway, is shorting U.S. Treasuries at this point. Real estate has come down a lot, but it's still overpriced. I wouldn't touch the stock market, actually, because it's not cheap by any historical parameters. So I'm still accumulating gold on a monthly basis, personally.
Yeah, and I think you're right on the Treasuries trade. It's only a question of timing. And, of course, I remember going to conferences before anybody ever knew who I was, but everybody knew who you were, including myself, and I would listen to you speak. And you said that the best bargain you had ever seen in your life was just physical silver, and that people should buy it. And I saw you give that speech for a few years before silver moved up. But, of course, it was $4 an ounce when you were talking about what a bargain it was. And anybody that bought silver at $4, even though it's retreated from its $50 high, it's still almost $30. So a lot of times when you recognize a bargain, you recognize it early. And of course, the only reason it's a bargain is because other people don't see what you do.
Yeah, that's right. And at some point in the future, I look forward to selling most of my gold and silver and buying U.S. common stocks. But I don't anticipate doing that until they're yielding 6% or something like that in current dividends. So gold and silver are still the places to be, I'm afraid.
Yeah, and I would think, too, that we're going to have some real constructive free market type reforms before we can really put in a decisive bottom in the U.S. stock market that would encourage people like you to want to buy. I think if we continue to move down this path that we're on now, it's going to just make U.S. equities that much less attractive as an investment.
Yeah, that's right. And I'm continuing to buy the precious metals because everything the U.S. government is doing is not only the wrong thing, it's exactly the opposite of the right thing. And as long as they keep doing that, things are going to keep getting worse. The problem is that everybody is looking to the government as the solution to the problems. They think there's some kind of a magic cornucopia. But in fact, the U.S. government is the cause for all of the problems that we have today, and the reason why things are actually going to get worse, much worse in the next couple of years at this point.
Well, that's also something that we share. You know, you're known as a man of the world. You travel quite a bit. I would say that governments are the problem everywhere. It's not just America where the government is screwing things up. It's all over the world. What are the places that you travel to that you invest in where you think the government is doing the least amount of damage?
Well, I spend about half of the year right now in Latin America, mostly Argentina and Uruguay. And those governments there are as stupid as the American government, even more stupid, you could say. I like them for their lifestyle and other factors. And the fact that as a foreigner living in those countries, the governments leave you alone. You're an honored guest. But if I was going to put my finger on a country in the world where things are pretty well done and the standard of living of the average citizen is going up, I'd have to say Singapore would be number one. Hong Kong would be number two. And there's some rather exotic places out there that are likely to be on the runway to do well, like, believe it or not, the ex-Soviet Republic of Georgia.
Yeah, and you know, one of the interesting things about Singapore, where everybody has a rising standard of living, is they have among the lowest taxes in the world, particularly on the 1%, and they don't even have a minimum wage law. They're one of the few countries left that doesn't have a minimum wage law, yet wages are rising much faster without help from government because they have a freer market, and that's really what's responsible. But hey, we'll be back. We got Doug for another segment. Don't go away. The Peter Schiff Show will continue. Welcome back. This is Peter Schiff along with Doug Casey, founder and chairman of Casey Research, and really one of the towering figures, I say, among the gloom and doomers out there, which I would put myself in that category. In fact, Doug Casey is almost really a contemporary of my father, who really got me started. But my father's book, The Biggest Con, came out in the early 1970s, a book which might have had some influence on Doug Casey as well. Would you say, Doug?
Well, I've never read that particular book, but your dad was certainly out there, ringing the bell about the fire that's burning in the American economy. So,
yeah, if you haven't read The Biggest Con, it's a great book. You can still find copies of them. I still have copies lying around over here. But he wrote that book, I think, in 1972. I think it was really one of the first books of its kind to come out there and really, sound the alarm. But hey, Doug, I want to play a little sound for you from President Obama. This is a speech that he just gave, and I've started playing. I played one cut of it, but I have a few more. And I think it's really like a plagiarism. It should be a plagiarism scandal because he's plagiarizing another individual, Elizabeth Warren, who said the exact same thing, almost word for word. It shows that he is, in fact, paying attention to Joe Biden, who is a famous plagiarizer. But according to the president, people who are rich in America are only rich because of sheer luck and circumstance, that it has nothing to do with their own intelligence or their own hard work. And I know you're a successful guy. You know a lot of successful people. Let me actually play that clip for you, and you can comment on it. Here, cut number 13.
And there are a lot of wealthy, successful Americans who agree with me because they want to give something back. They know they didn't. If you've been successful, you didn't get there on your own. You didn't get there on your own. I'm always struck by people who think, well, it must be because I was just so smart. There are a lot of smart people out there. It must be because I worked harder than everybody else. Let me tell you something. There are a whole bunch of hard-working people out there.
Yeah. So in other words, people didn't get rich because they're smart and because they worked hard. They just happened to get lucky, and they got help from the government.
It's more proof that the president, Obama, he's a fool. He doesn't understand the nature of wealth. It's not being smart or working hard that makes you rich. It's successfully providing goods and services for other people. When you become rich, it's proof that you've given other people what they've wanted, because that's the only reason they'll give you money voluntarily. So
right.
his whole perception of economic reality is wrong. It's shameful.
Right.
But
because he's saying that the rich have to give something back, which implies that they took something out. They didn't take anything. They exchanged their products and services for other people's money in a voluntary exchange that benefited both people.
That's right. And but the truth is, Peter, that the Republicans philosophically and practically are almost as bad as the Democrats. The Republicans say they believe in a free market, but as far as the way they act, it makes them hypocrites. At least the Democrats are honest about hating personal freedom and hating
the only
free
thing
market.
they're not honest about is they don't want to acknowledge that they're socialists. They like to pretend that they still believe in capitalism because it's still popular, despite the fact that that's not what we practice. So yes, I mean they're honest in their approach that they promise more government and then deliver it. The Republicans promise less government and deliver more government, but I still think there's a lot of dishonesty in that their failure to embrace the ideology that they really believe in, because they're afraid that if they actually expose it or reveal it, that there's going to be a backlash.
Yeah, that's right. I don't know where the Republicans come up with these embarrassing candidates that they do come up with, like John McCain, that hostile and mildly demented old man that they put up the last time, and now Romney, who is really nothing but an empty suit. It's just horrible.
Well, I mean, other than Ron Paul, do you think there was anybody even running in the Republican field who would have been a decent candidate?
You, I think, when you were running for...
Well, I wasn't running for
Senate.
president. Oh, Gary
running.
Johnson. I forgot about Gary Johnson, but the media forgot about him too, which is why he wasn't in the debates. But he is running as a libertarian. But other than Gary Johnson and Ron Paul.
No, there isn't anybody else, and you're right. Gary Johnson is a decent human being, and if I was inclined to vote, which I'm not, because I believe in a variation of the old '60s saying: "Suppose they gave a war and nobody came." Well, I would extend that. Suppose they gave a tax and nobody paid. Suppose they gave a regulation and nobody obeyed. So suppose they gave an election and nobody voted. It would disempower the U.S. government. So that's what I advocate people do, is not vote, because there's nobody worth voting for at this point.
Well, that might be true, but unfortunately somebody is going to get elected. So even if you don't vote, somebody will. And so, you know, sometimes you vote for the lesser of two evils simply because it's better than getting the greater of the two evils. Although I would agree, any one individual vote is likely to tilt the outcome of an election, particularly for somebody like me. I mean, I live in Connecticut. You know, Obama's going to win Connecticut. Doesn't matter what I do. I could vote. I cannot vote, you know. So, I mean, but I'd like to vote for Gary Johnson, though, at least to register that. Because if you don't vote at all, well, then, all right, you're not even there. But at least if I vote for Gary Johnson, it does show that I'm, you know, sticking it to him in a way. I'm basically letting them know that I'm not happy with my choices, as opposed to just somebody who's apathetic and doesn't care. So I would say that it does make sense. If you really don't like what's going on, just vote for Gary Johnson. I think that does a better way of saying that you're displeased than just not showing up.
Yes, you could make a good argument for that, although I look forward to the day when 80% of the American populace doesn't show up. Half of them don't show up to vote right now, and it's just as well.
But the problem, Doug, the problem with that is that the 20% who vote will be the ones on welfare, Medicare, Social Security, whatever, all these government programs. You know, and what kind of government do you think we're going to have then? I mean, you know, what we need is the producers. People who are paying the bills. We need those people to vote, and we need the people who are riding in the wagon to stay home.
Yeah, that's right. But there are less producers every day and more freeloaders every day. I mean, right now, as you're aware, almost half of the residents of the U.S. are net recipients of government quote-unquote benefits, and that number is going up. It's likely to go up radically. So the situation is very, very grave from a freedom point of view at this point.
How much longer? I can never pinpoint it, but if you were to handicap it, when do you think it all hits the fan? You think it's going to happen during the term of whoever wins this election, or do you think we're going to pull more rabbits out of a hat and you and I are still going to be on panels 4 and 5 years from now predicting a collapse?
Boy, it's really tough to predict both an event and the timing. That old joke, don't do both at the same time. But in my opinion, we entered the hurricane, the Greater Depression, as I call it, in 2007, 2008. And now, because not just the U.S. government, but governments all over the world have been printing up trillions of currency units, they've papered over the problem, bailed out banks that righteously should fail and so forth. But in Europe, as we speak, they're moving out of the eye of the hurricane and back into the storm, and the storm is going to be much more serious and much longer lasting than it was in 2008. And China is the next to go. Japan is going to go over the edge, and so is the U.S. So I would say 2013 is going to be a very unlucky year for everybody. Do you
think that's the order? Do you think the Chinese or the Japanese have their day of reckoning before the U.S.?
Yes. I mean, China's economy has boomed unbelievably since 1980. It's not even recognizable as being the same country that it was 32 years ago. But while the average entrepreneur is freer in China, and can be much more productive in China than he can in the U.S. They have far fewer regulations and unions and all these things that cause distortions in the market in China. Still, the government has created a lot of debt and so forth. No, I think that China's in a lot of trouble, even though this century is going to be the Chinese century. They're going to have a very serious depression along the way also.
And if that is the case, if China and Japan break first, we might even be able to dig ourselves into a deeper hole if the dollar becomes not only the safe haven of the Eurozone, but the safe haven from a collapse in China and Japan. Then who knows? We might be able to make it through another 4 years of massive borrowing. But I don't know. I wouldn't want to bet on it. I think that we're next. I think that the problems here are worse than in China and Japan. But I agree, there are malinvestments and bubbles all over the world, thanks to governments and central banks. Doug, thanks a lot for being on the show, and I appreciate it again being on a panel with you. I look forward to seeing you at future events. Everybody else, we got another segment coming up. I got more.